You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome on into Toronto Sports Rush, and it is McGuire Mondays. Yes, we are here on this Monday, just less than 12 hours after the Leafs blew a Game 7, 6-1 against the Florida Panthers to lose a series and have lots of media questions swirling about them. And Pierre McGuire, as he joins me now for McGuire Mondays. I'm Julie Stewart-Binks. Since we talked less than 12 hours ago, as I said, how do you feel about everything?
I feel good. First of all, I loved the way you handled last night. I thought you were fantastic. That's number one.
Stop.
Proud to be your partner.
Thank you.
Number two, the Leafs are what they are right now. They're a team that's looking for an identity. They're a team that's looking for direction. And they're a team that, quite frankly, is not as bad as everybody says they are. So what needs to change? They need to become mentally tougher, physically tougher, and I think a little bit deeper at the depth scoring positions. I don't think that's that hard to fix. Brad Treliving has showed in his short time as GM in Toronto, Julie, that he understands the art of team building. Getting Tanev, getting Oliver Ekman-Larsson, adding Brandon Carlo were all huge things for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They were fantastic. Adding Anthony Stolarz last year in free agency was a mammoth stroke of genius by him. They've done a lot of things right in Toronto. Now they have to take the next step. I know people don't want to hear that, but I don't think the next step's that hard for them, Julie. I really don't.
Okay, so you woke up today a lot like how I felt. I woke up, I felt somewhat optimistic about this group because I kept thinking, hey, like they made it to a Game 7 against Florida, and the Rangers couldn't make it to a Game 7 against Florida last year, and they were in the Eastern Conference Final. And I started just kind of like thinking about it in a bigger scheme of things. But then I was swiftly brought back down to life when I just opened up my phone and saw everything, anything, a lot of Canadian media that are around the Leafs every single day that have dedicated their entire lives to it are angry, are kind of fed up with this same thing and calling for blood, calling for heads. When you said that there needs to be something for them to take the next step, like what does that tangibly look like?
Well, first of all, I think there has to be a major debrief with Keith Pelley, Brendan Shanahan, ownership, and Brad Treliving. This is not one where the coaches get involved. That's the next one. First, it's an upper management meeting that has to take place and decide this is direction we need to go in, this is direction we're going to go in, or this is where you've taken us and it's not good enough. So they got to put all their cards on the table, the management team. If you remember correctly, our friend Keith Pelley joined the Leafs late into the process last year. He really couldn't put his fingerprints on it in terms of managerial decision-making, and I don't know how much influence he would have had on Brendan and on Brad anyways. But I would say this, they have to have that meeting, number one. Number two, and this is really important, after that meeting, there have to be some hard questions asked, and I think there will be. Then the coaches have to be involved, and that's going to be a harder meeting. Who did you like as a player? Who didn't you like as a player? Which guy's expendable? Which guy do we have to have? And so that's a hard meeting to have. I've been in those. Those are not easy meetings to have because you can really course correct in a good way or course correct in a bad way if you make a misread. So this is where Brad Treliving, more than anybody else in this organization, has to be an expert on every single player in their organization, whether it's a draft pick, a minor league farmhand, or an NHL player. And if he's not an expert, that's where mistakes will happen.
Okay, so before you said the coaches going over everyone, you said there's going to be other questions asked. I think a lot of people have the spotlight on Brendan Shanahan right now. How much responsibility does he take for where the Leafs are right now?
I wouldn't be able to answer that without guessing. So here's what I'm going to say. He has been the director of hockey operations, regardless as to what his title is, for a very long period of time. He was responsible for hiring general managers. He was responsible for firing general managers. He had an input in terms of the Mike Babcock hire. He had a big input in terms of the Mike Babcock fire. He had a big input in terms of the Sheldon Keefe hire. He had a big input on Kyle Dubas. So Brendan Shanahan's fingerprints are on this. He called it the Shanahan plan. You didn't call it that. I didn't call it that. I'm not saying Brendan has to be beaten down in public because I don't agree with that strategy, but he needs to be asked some hard questions by upper management and ownership. Keith Pelley and ownership have to ask him really hard pointed questions. You're, double digits into your tenure as the president of hockey operations here. Why haven't we been able to take the next step? That should be the first question that should be asked.
Right.
And then you go forward from there.
Yeah, and some of the other sort of spotlights that have come to fruition, as we know, Mitch Marner is under a lot of heat, especially just everyone saying the lasting image of him is kind of like yelling at his teammates during that game. And he had a quote at the end of the game that we didn't know yet last night because we were on air, but he said they took a risky pick on a small town kid from Toronto, and I've been forever grateful to be able to wear this maple leaf. When you hear that, and you know what his situation is, where he is an unrestricted free agent, what does it make you think about Mitch Marner's future?
That he'll be playing for another team. And this is really important. When you're a player that's drafted in the National Hockey League, you don't pick the team that's going to draft you. They pick you. So, Mark Hunter was a big part of drafting Mitchell Marner out of the London Knights, 4th overall. That's not Mitchell Marner's fault. Mitchell Marner went to Toronto. He had 5 seasons of 100-plus points. That's an amazingly strong accomplishment. It's not like Mitch Marner's the only reason why this team hasn't won. He's part of it. And I bet you he wishes he could have been part of the solution, not part of the problem. But I think they have too many players that are the same. If you did a dissection, Julie, of the Florida Panthers roster and compared it to the Toronto Maple Leafs roster, Sam Bennett, do they have one player in Toronto that's like Sam Bennett? The answer is no. Do they have a player that's a little bit like Sasha Barkov? Yeah, potentially, Austin Matthews. Do they have anybody else that could be like their 4th-line grunts, whether it's A.J. Greer, whether it's Tomasz Nosek, whether it's Jonah Gadjevich? You look at all their depth players. They all arrive in a nasty humor, and they pulverize you at the point of attack. Florida has that. Toronto's still searching for that. So the roster's still incomplete. Is it getting better? You betcha it is. It's getting a lot better. So I don't think this has to be a total beatdown on the team. But in the Mitchell Marner case, I'd be shocked if he was back in Toronto next year.
Right. And as we mentioned last night, you pointed out, who would want to, if you were him, why would you want to even be back? I mean, it's got to be taking such a toll on you, these guys. And Brad Marchand had a great quote, too, last night where he said, fans beat the pressure into this team. It's got to be tough on these guys to walk to the rink every day and feel that. And
yes, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I want you to finish because then I'm going to add on to what you're saying.
And I think that two things can be true. I think that the Leafs players on this team, they have a completely different situation than any other team based on the fans and the relentless pressure that the fans have. But I don't also think that the fans can necessarily be blamed because they have spent their money, their time, their entire lives watching this team. And so it's really difficult to kind of blame anyone, but what you can agree on is that it is almost impossible to play in Toronto.
This is not a fan's problem. I respect the fans in Toronto unbelievably. I worked in Toronto for a long time. I lived in Toronto for a long time. I respect the sporting community in Toronto. Keith Pelley's a real special friend of mine. I saw what he did at TSN, building it into a brand. I saw what he did with the Olympic coverage. I saw what he did at Sportsnet, and I saw what he did with the Toronto Argonauts. So this is not a fan problem. He is fan-friendly, and this is not a fan problem in Toronto. The most eloquent spokesman that you just raised is Brad Marchand. Think about his career as a Boston Bruin. He wins in 2011. Everybody's happy. He loses in 2013. He has a devastatingly costly mistake in 2019 that leads to St. Louis winning a Stanley Cup. Okay, on Alex Pietrangelo missed back check. That's on him. He knows it. We're in 2025 now. He was the captain of the Boston Bruins for 2 years. 2 unbelievably savage meltdowns by the Boston Bruins in the playoffs, both to the same team, the Florida Panthers. And guess what happens? The Boston Bruins trade their captain in an original 6 hockey market to Florida. And you see what Marchand says after he gets traded? I am so grateful to be in this situation with these players at this time in my career. I think we're going to hear the very same things from Mitchell Marner when he moves on. And it has nothing to do with the fans. It has to do with the unbelievable pressure and scrutiny that you face every time you play, especially in Original Six City, as a big part of your organization.
Right. Like it's just part of what it means to be playing for a team like that. Like
100%.
And I think I appreciated Brad's comments last night because it felt like he empathized with the team that even though he said he gets up to, he hate all the people that hate him, give him more strength in a way. Right. And like Toronto fans just cannot stand this guy for good reason for so many different years. But, historically, this Maple Leafs team, looking back at some of the stats, like, and even just like we'll look at Game 5 and Game 7 in the series, they laid an egg at home, and they seem to they cannot close out series at home. And in what way do you think that is just the fear of these players not wanting to make mistakes in front of their fans?
Julie, you remember this line that I told you a long time ago. 3 things you want to establish in a playoff series: concern, doubt, and you just said it, fear. Florida was able to establish that. When they went down 2-0 in this series, I remember telling you, they're not doubting, they're not concerned, and they're not fearful. Because they know they're going home. When they went to Toronto and they were able to win Game 5 after winning 3 and 4 at home, Toronto experienced all 3 of those things. They got through Game 6, but again, they came back. They were concerned and they were doubting. And then halfway through the first period, I believe Toronto became fearful. So I think that's a big part of what you're saying. I think your statement is so eloquent and so spot on. I think it's very fair. It's not beating down Toronto. It's just a fact. I think these players played with more fear rather than more confidence. And that's something they're going to have to fix long term.
Right. They were scared to do the wrong thing, right? We see that a lot. Like you're afraid to lose and you don't want to make a pass that might turn into a turnover and Florida's off the rush, but then you don't end up playing. Maybe you're not as aggressive. You're not even able to touch the puck that we saw in Game 7. But knowing that is a thing that exists, how do you deal with that going forward?
I think it comes down to internal leadership. I think it comes down to the type of players you get. Florida wasn't like this before they got Matthew Tkachuk. Florida wasn't like this before they got Sam Bennett. Like, I remember doing a lot of games in Florida where there were only 6,500 people in the building.
I remember that too.
You know what, and Julie, I got to tell you, just to be fair, and this is more of a Leaf-centric show, but I just want people to understand in Toronto, I did a game once in Florida which had playoff implications late in the year between the Florida Panthers and the Philadelphia Flyers. And I'm going to say there were maybe 6,800 people in the building. I'm going to say 5,000 of those 6,800 were from Philadelphia. And I'm not kidding you. So how did Florida change it? Florida changed it by going out and getting Sam Bennett. Florida changed it by going out and getting Matthew Tkachuk. Florida changed it by going out and getting hard physical pieces on the back end. I've heard from so many hockey people today, where did Nico Mikkola come from? He's a beast.
Yeah.
No,
I remember him on the Rangers last year.
Yeah, exactly right. He was with the Rangers. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And that's why, and I'm not saying I'm anti-analytics, but I think the eye test and the ferocity of a player matters a lot when you're evaluating them. And that's got to be the next step that the Leafs take when they come to evaluating players that can help them get to that next level.
Yeah, that's a great point. Analytics are very helpful, but there is a certain extra aspect of a player's personality, of their character, of their ability to step up and really relish in the pressure and not be scared of. We know that the fans aren't going to change. Like there's not going to be some sort of collective meeting in Toronto where they say, all right, guys, everyone just stop being mean to the Leafs and then maybe they'll win, and leave them alone. No, because this is part of everyone there that has lived there and has had to endure everything that's gone about this. Now, the way that Game 7 ended last night, Pierre, with a 6-1 loss, and it was just like the last 7 or 8 minutes just dragged on, and it felt like this day of execution, and it was just so bad. How do you think the way Game 7 ended could influence how things go from here?
I think it could have a big impact. I love the fact that you brought that up. So everybody's different in terms of how they want to prepare their teams going into a season. I would, if I were the Leafs right now going into next year, the start of training camp, and I wouldn't show it to all the players in the organization. I'd show it to my established NHL players. I'd run that back without any narration the last 10 minutes of the third period of Game 7. And at the end of it, I would say, we're never going to have that happen again. We're going to inflict that on the opposition. This is no longer happening in our building. And then I would have my leader, whomever it is, whether it's Austin, whether it's Johnny Tavares, whether it's Morgan Riley, whomever you choose. I'm not in that room. I don't know who the most vocal person is in that room. But I would turn it. I would leave. I'd take our coaches out of there, and I'd leave for them to decide how they wanted to pursue this season. I will never forget this, Julie, as long as I live. It's just personal experience. We were down 3-1 to the Washington Capitals in a playoff series in 1992. Scotty Bowman called Barry Smith, Rick Keogh, and I to his room. We're the three coaches of the team. He says, how are we going to beat this team from Washington? We got to play Game 5 and Game 7 on the road. We got to win 5 to force 6 in our place. We know if we get to 6 in our place, we're coming back for 7. So it was pretty simple. We designed a neutral zone scheme. We were an aggressive 2-1-2 forecheck team. We went to a passive 1-4 delay. I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds of strategy, but that's what we did. And so I said, okay, Scotty, like, when do you want us to deliver this message to the players? You're not. None of you are. Mario Lemieux is. So it was internal peer pressure. Players monitoring players, not standing up and challenging one another, chest to chest, eyeball to eyeball, in a spirited but positive way. I believe if the Leafs do that before the season starts next year, they're going to be an amazingly captive audience, and they're going to be unbelievably successful. I truly believe they're not that far away from being a great team.
I completely agree with you, and I think that was a great story to tell in terms of having this be the onus on them. Like, to take it out of hockey for a second, it's like I did this course at Queen's University called Motivational Interviewing, which has sort of come back around, where it's instead of telling people the behavior changes they need to make, you have them tell you what they have to do. And you do it by asking a series of questions, by putting their actions in juxtaposition with their values, right? So if their actions are that they're not hard on the puck. They sort of they aren't standing up for one another in difficult situations, but their goal is to win the Stanley Cup. Those things, it just doesn't compute. So then you have them answer it like, well, then how do you play? What do you have to do each little step? What can you do today to get to that next part, right? And then when people have to explain what they need to do, it makes them more accountable than someone saying, hey, we need you to be doing this. We need you to be doing this. When you have to say it, it is a part of like a personal onus on you. So I think that is exactly with that story that you mentioned with Mario Lemieux telling the guys, like, he believes it. Like, we're going to together have this as part of our identity going forward. And we know that we got to wrap up soon or else I'm going to talk to Pierre about the Leafs for like the next 5 weeks.
Let me just give you one more. This is good for our listenership, and then we'll move on. When the New York Islanders beat the Edmonton Oilers, Edmonton's first trip to the Stanley Cup final back in the early 1980s, Wayne Gretzky was walking out of the rink, and he saw the Islanders players with ice bags all over them. They looked just beaten and mangled and destroyed. And Gretzky said, now I know. And that was his learning point. Wayne said this publicly, and he's told me this privately. That was when he knew there was a significant toll to pay in order to win. And look at the Oilers after that.
Wow.
They just went on in this unbelievable run from like 85, 84 until 1990. And Gretz obviously was a huge part of it. But in order to get there, you have to understand what the toll is that you have to pay. And I think Toronto is starting to figure that out. It's taken a while and it's been painful, but now I think they kind of get it.
Right. And speaking of painful, we're not even sure about the injuries that this team has endured. And we might not never know, because Austin Matthews has been pretty tight-lipped about his situation even before this season, when we knew he was dealing with issues with wrist injuries and different things like that. But last thing I'll ask you is, if Florida goes on to win the Cup, how does this affect how people look at this Toronto team?
Oh, I think in a better way, but Florida's going to be a tough team to handle as long as they got out of this series without a lot of injuries. You think about it. Dallas, Edmonton is going to be a smash-up job like you can't believe. I don't know how much is going to be left for either team when they get out of that series, whomever might win. Carolina's not as physical. They do have some players that can be, especially Jordan Martinook, Dmitry Orlov, obviously Jacob Slavin, Brent Burns, but they're not. That's not their identity. Like, they're not a smash-mouth, ground and pound, we're going to mangle you kind of a team. They just outsmart you. They're unbelievably well coached. They're really smart. They pinch you off in the neutral zone. They don't give you a lot on the power play. But it's a different kind of series. If Florida gets by this series, I don't know who can beat them. I really don't, as long as they stay healthy.
Right. If they can keep what they're doing and their identity going, which I think a lot of people questioned based on the number of playoff games they've played over the last 3 years. And I mentioned it to you, I think before this series, like Bobrovsky's played an extra season based on the number of playoff games he's played. And a lot of these guys have played, over 60 playoff games in the last 3 years. And you wonder, at what point does that start to really translate into tangible issues for them in their body? But obviously not right now. And you mentioned guys that they brought up, guys that they've given more ice time. And that's such a great way to have managed a team to be able to continue having that identity going forward. And we know that this is like a tough day for Leafs fans, and it will be tough going forward for a long time, but there are still many questions to be answered and many potential moves that could happen. And I'm very curious to see what this organization ends up doing. If they end up even doing anything at all, we have no idea what the conversations are like in the room. We're just here trying to make sense of a season that was really, really good. It was remarkable. They won the Atlantic Division. They did things that they hadn't done in years past, and they they have better pieces on their team. However, the way it ended is something that will be just burned into the brains of Leafs fans, but also fans of other teams too, because I had a friend, Katie Nolan. I'm going to put her out there. She's a big Bruins fan. Oh, yeah. She sent me a message before the game saying, I wishing you good luck. Like, everyone deserves something good in their life. And I thought, you know what? Let me get the exact text. She said, thoughts and prayers are with you tonight. And I said, feels kind of like a curse coming from a Bruins fan, but I'll take it. And then she said, the universe owes you joy. I just don't have any faith in your team's ability to get it for you.
Well, the sun came up today and everybody's smiling. I know it's a down day in Leafland, but I think the future is more optimistic than a lot of the pundits are saying right now. I really do.
2 steps backwards, 2 steps forwards, 1 step backward, whatever the saying is. They made some moves. They weren't able to get past Florida. It was tough, but there is optimism, as you mentioned, on the horizon. Pierre, thank you so much for all your insight, analysis, and also giving us some sage advice and things to chew on as we look ahead to the Leafs in the future. And I'm sure that we will be talking very soon when we find out what happens with management and players and beyond. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to us, and keep it locked on here. Like, subscribe. We'll have all of your news and insight of the Toronto Maple Leafs as they look to figure out a way to win the elusive Stanley Cup. That's it for us.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.